Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. Now, for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is that we have decided to talk about. And my guest this evening, again, is Dr. Rick Staggenborg, psychiatrist, MD, who was with the VA for a long time, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff about him that you'll hear. Now, you've been on before, maybe 3 or 4 times in the past, and I have you back on again because you're so blasted interesting, and you're so bright, and you're so fun to talk with.
Thanks, Don.
You bet. So we're not going to go through the ABCs of who you are, but we'll just do a brief overview so we can talk about the things that are important today on December 20th, 2012. We have a whole list of things that we talked about as possible things to discuss, but the show's only good for about 58 minutes, so we need 4 hours to cover the things that you're interested in. So talk about who you are. Your full name is?
Richard K. Staggenborg.
Richard K. Staggenborg. What kind of question can I ask you about that name?
Everybody asks me whether I'm German or not.
Yes, that was a question I was asking. Are you German or not?
I don't know. There were a lot of Staggenborgs in the 1600s in the Ulm area. I found that out by Googling the name. But so we were probably from that family. But a German I know said that can't possibly be a German name, so perhaps we migrated from Sweden a long, long time ago, or that area. Borg is common, obviously, in Sweden.
Yes, yes. So do you care?
No. I'm Germanic. I mean, that strain runs through me. I mean, these things carry down, these cultural things carry down through the generations, so it's kind of interesting to think about that, but it doesn't make me who I am. It's just one influence.
When were you born?
I was born in 1958.
And where were you born?
Oh, where? Here in Portland.
58 here in Portland. Have you been out of Oregon before?
Yeah, I lived in Hawaii when I was in the Army, and I lived in Albany, New York after that, and I lived in New Mexico for 3 years.
Mm-hmm. So, okay. And my favorite question, you probably have an answer memorized by now. You ready? If I were to ask your best friend, who is Rick Staggenborg? What would your best friend say? Rick is?
A nice guy who's really into politics, probably.
Uh-huh.
None of my good friends will listen to me about politics, so I couldn't go beyond that much.
Yeah. Why are you into politics?
Well, I guess it started during the Vietnam War when I was growing up. My brother was in Vietnam in 1968, so I started reading the newspapers regularly, watching the evening news and trying to figure out what the hell was going on, watching the anti-war movement grow, totally fascinated, wishing I could be more a part of it, especially things like Woodstock.
Yeah.
Had a thing for girls with long hair and granny dresses twirling around.
And lots of grass.
Well, that too. I won't say. I was only 10 at the time, remember.
So you were trying to figure out what was going on. Did you figure out what was going on?
Not for a long time, no. It took the Persian Gulf War to make me realize that that they have a war when they want to. And I was really alarmed at the fact that American people bought into that so easily, so soon after Vietnam. Really, I was shocked.
Yeah.
It woke me up, and that's what led me to start something I called Soldiers for Peace at that time.
Soldiers for Peace. You said they have a war when they want to. Who's the they you're talking about when you say that?
Well, the kind of people who have the influence in government and the media to drum up support for wars that are really just wars for corporate empire.
Wars for corporate empire. Man, what does that mean?
I think most.
And you know you don't have to answer my questions.
No, I don't. I don't mind. You know, corporations like the oil corporations, obviously, their interests are defined. American interests are defined as their interests.
Yes.
And that goes all the way back to a damn fruit company in Guatemala. I mean, at least.
What fruit company?
Uh, was it Del Monte or it became Del Monte.
Yeah, I forgot the name too.
United
Fruit.
United Fruit, right. Yeah, so we started a war in Guatemala. The CIA did. We didn't. It wasn't official.
Sure.
Most of the wars that we get involved with aren't official. Syria is not officially our war, but we were behind it from the beginning, I'm sure.
Uh-huh.
MI6, CIA, Mossad, they're behind all that stuff going on in the Mideast. And again, it's to secure oil and natural gas supplies. So they're powerful. The international bankers, they take their cut out of every war from the military-industrial complex and everybody else.
Why would they want to secure the oil and gas supplies to prevent it from falling into somebody else's hands?
There's a competition going on in the Mideast. There's a pipeline. The Russians already have pipeline or pipelines up north, and they are planning on building some other ones and working with Iran on that and other enemies of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a competition between that and there's a Arabian, I guess you could say, pipeline.
All those countries.
Well, yeah, going from Qatar north to supply gas to Israel, among other countries.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's basically two different alliances of countries, and the ones that are competing with the NATO allies are the axis of evil, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Russia, who Mitt Romney said was our greatest enemy. Somebody must have clued him in that what was going on in the Mideast had a lot to do with isolating Russia. So he never would have figured it out by himself.
We were going to have a nice conversation with you. Introduced Mitt Romney. Thanks a lot. How is old Mitt nowadays?
Oh, who cares? He's rich.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Anything, a religious preference nowadays?
I don't have a religion. I don't believe in religion. I believe in my concept of what God is, which other people would call pantheistic, or I suppose some people might even call it atheistic, because I don't define God as a little man with a beard sitting on a cloud. It's a little more sophisticated than that.
Say a few more words of what God is to you, will you?
By definition, God is everything. But it has other qualities by virtue of being everything. I believe there's a consciousness, a higher consciousness.
A higher consciousness.
Yeah, and that's where most people diverge if they don't believe in God. They say that there's no consciousness out there.
There's something else beyond me.
Right, but I think, since you brought it up, I don't normally talk about this, but
You don't have to.
no, that's okay. I really find the subject interesting. It's not like I grew up with this belief. I was an agnostic for 50 years, and it took me a while to come up with something that I could believe was more likely than not, a kind of God that's more likely than not. And I think that I think that we have a higher plane of existence, and that our physical universe is a manifestation of our will, in a way, our collective will. Because if we have a higher existence and our collective consciousness is God, or at least the mind of God, and created the physical universe, and we are the avatars of our true selves.
Where is the book that talks about these things? You're going to write the book?
I haven't written one, but the concepts are not new. I understand. I have heard other people talk about the same thing I never heard of before I started studying it. One of them, though, a book I'd recommend is the God Theory.
Mm-hmm.
I understand it's quite similar. I talked to the author of that book on the radio one time. Not a long conversation, but he said, I outlined what I was talking about, and he said, yeah, it like the same thing in the book.
Name dropper on the radio. You got a radio show, don't you?
Well, yeah, but this
I
was,
know.
this was on somebody else's radio show. I just called in because I was interested in the book, and turns out, yeah, he's an astrophysicist, by the way. So one of the many, many people like myself who doesn't see any conflict between spirituality, God, and science.
Uh-huh.
We just see them as two different aspects of reality.
Yeah. What do you do to earn a living to put a roof over your head?
Actually, my wife does that these days.
She feeds you and takes care of
Yeah,
you.
I'm hoping to win the lottery. If I don't, I suppose I'll have to go
That's
back
it.
to work someday.
We're going to talk about the doomsday prophecy tomorrow. Rick.
Well, there you go. I mean, I wasn't going to worry about it till at least the 21st of this year. Then I might have to get serious about making some money.
Do you have a partner?
Yes, I have a wife. Mm-hmm. Thank God, since I'm not working.
Yeah.
She's a nurse in Coquille, Oregon, down near Coos Bay where I live. And she's wonderful.
Are you practicing as a psychiatrist at all anymore nowadays?
Not right now.
Okay. You're going to go back to that eventually, you think?
If I don't hit the lottery first, or if I don't write that book I've been promising to write and it turns out to be successful. Either one of those things would make me think twice at least about going back full time.
You haven't talked about your political career. You ran for the U.S. Senate a short time ago, didn't you?
2010. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're going to still pursue a political career?
Again, if I win the lottery, I'll be in a position to not work and travel. And no, I mean seriously, I've never been I never liked fundraising. I didn't fundraise much for my own. I didn't fundraise for my campaign.
Why did you run?
I ran because when I saw the travesty of the healthcare reform debate, mm-hmm. And realized from early on it was nothing but a bailout for a failing medical insurance industry, I knew that Democrats weren't on our side either. I know, shocking that it took me that long. But yeah, it took that in 2009 to make me realize that our government was so corrupt it would never deal with global warming, with our dependence on foreign oil. It would never end the wars. It would never do anything to improve the economic system, fair taxation, name the issue, Don. It would never give us universal health care.
What government would you substitute for America's government that would do a better job than the
Venezuela?
DC? Venezuela?
Mm-hmm.
That's a communist country.
No, it isn't.
What is it?
It's a democratic socialist country.
Yeah.
It's
Bolivarian revolution.
Yeah, it has a lot in common with the European democratic socialism, but it goes further because they privatized the oil industry, which is a good way to stop wars if we did it here, if there wasn't a profit motive in it. I'm trying to remember, I don't know if they've privatized electrical power and water, but some countries in South America have. Mm-hmm. Did I say privatized? I mean
nationalized.
Nationalized, yes.
Yes,
I think that both of those things should be nationalized in a rational society because everybody needs water, obviously, just like they need food and housing. Everybody needs electricity, too, in the modern world. I mean, it's something that should be a basic right. And there's no reason government couldn't do it. Why do people have to profit off it? If the government did it, then we wouldn't be subsidizing oil companies and giving them $3 billion tax rebate when they made the most profits ever, Exxon, in 2010.
Is Latin America slipping away from the grasp of the American empire, American hegemony? Is Latin America being the focal point for the future of independence from the American empire?
I think so, if we back them up. But there are things going on I'm sure you've heard of Project for a New American Centuries strategy for rebuilding America's defenses. God, do I have to use the quotes? I'll have to think of some other way. Defenses, how's that?
How about war?
Yeah.
Department? Never mind.
Well, but for people that aren't familiar with that, they wrote back in 2000, about a year before 9/11, they wrote a paper called Strategy for Rebuilding America's Defenses, and it was all about how to take over the world. And it involved destabilizing, overthrowing governments in, among other countries, Egypt, Syria, Iran, Libya. So what we're seeing right now going on in the Mideast was they had it all planned out in 2000, and a lot of that was based on a paper that was written in 1996.
Mm-hmm.
So
And this is not just speculation. This was a
no,
paper.
these are well known, and I've seen video of General Wesley Clark talking about
Good
how
man.
he found out that they had plans on the table to do all these things. I mean, a coordinated plan. Now, people say, well, yeah, the military always has plans, but you've got to pick your target countries. And if you follow what's going on, there's a clear strategy to take over the entire region. And now they're talking about Obama's pivot to the east. Go look at strategy for New American, or rebuilding America's defenses. It's there too, the pivot to the east. And also at the same time, and very few people know about this, is what we're doing to control space, near space and deeper space.
We being America.
The United States primarily, yeah, but there are a lot of other countries cooperating with it. They've built a very large array of satellite antennas in New Zealand and Australia. What I mean by very large array is if you put antennas tuned to the same source in big distances apart, they have much more resolution.
Sure.
So they can, well, everybody knows, they can spot a single individual and positively identify them from space.
Why would they want to do that?
To kill them, for the most part. I mean, in the Mideast, it's to kill them. In the United States, they want to know where certain people are, I'm sure. They're talking about having 30,000 drones in the skies of America in, what was it, 10 or 20 years.
30,000 drones in the skies of America.
I'm terrible with numbers. It could have been 3,000, but
okay, 3,000.
but drones, you know, patrolling American skies and violating the Fourth Amendment right and left. I had a discussion with Colleen Rowley, who's with Women Against Military Madness. They have a campaign called Ground All Drones. She was talking about drones that could be as small as mosquitoes, fly right into your house and take pictures of everything there.
You're scary.
Well, it gets worse if you get into the detail.
Yeah.
But that is why, you know, I didn't know all that stuff when I started out, but I just knew things were much worse than I thought. There's a shadow government. There are people pulling the strings that can start wars when they want. And I decided to devote my life to trying to help other people wake up to this fact. This is not the same as been going on forever. This is much worse. There's never been a nation that was in a position to control by physical force the rest of the world. It's never happened before.
Okay.
And if we allow that to happen, we'll be enslaved at the same time. We're already seeing it with these austerity measures in the United States. We saw what it did in Europe. It provoked riots and international strikes. What has it provoked here? Really angry blogs. Big deal. That's not enough. So we need to build a unified movement that ties all these things together and gets people to understand, you know, get off your ass. We got to get involved. We got to get out on the streets. We got to do more than write letters to the editor. Although I do recommend that.
Is the American empire on a downward slope?
Well, let's hope so. It depends on how much people resist and how big a unified movement we can build, how much we can wake up, Americans in particular, but also people in Europe. You mentioned I have a radio show. I've had a guest on from Europe a couple of times who's really expert at this stuff. His reading is they're not much more aware in Europe than they are here of the bigger picture, the New World Order. And then you have countries against countries. You have people in Germany that don't want to have to pay off the debts of Italy or Spain. So they're behind these austerity measures, or at least they're not going to stand in solidarity. Not the bulk of people in Germany, for instance. But there are people in Germany who do understand it's in their best interest to work for justice for all of Europe and all the world. And
Justice, that word, justice. Now, let's continue with a few more personal
Oh,
questions
sure.
to get to you.
I guess I got into the main topic
And I
already.
love it. Did you enjoy your work as a psychiatrist?
Yes, I really did. I mostly did psychotherapy after a while. Started out being kind of a pill pusher because I guess I accepted that's what a psychiatrist was supposed to do. We get paid the big bucks. We're the only ones that can do it, so that's what we should do. I always talked to my patients and got to know them, but it wasn't until I'd been in it for a number of years that I realized what most of them needed was psychotherapy, and so I developed my skills in that area.
Mm-hmm. Do I understand that the pharmaceutical industry gives psychiatrists samples of drugs to use? Do you have any samples you can give me? Well, okay. And you have a partner now, a boyfriend, girlfriend, wife?
My wife.
You mentioned that,
Yeah.
And kids?
I have one daughter, and she gave me a grandson about 6 months ago, so now I have that to fight for too.
Yeah.
And I have 3 stepsons that are adults, and none of them are married.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to ask you a dumb question. How would you characterize your political persuasion? Left, right, center, Tea Party, or revolutionary, or what? How would you characterize yourself?
First of all, I don't like the distinction between conservative and liberal. They've been defined as by the media as you're either, well, liberal's a little more nebulous. It's the opposite.
It used to mean something.
Yeah, it's just the opposite of conservative, which basically the way the media defines it is fascist, meaning they think corporations should be in control. And I'm using fascist in the way that Mussolini used it when he said fascism is best defined as corporatism.
I appreciate Wikipedia, you know, they're pretty objective in defining these things and what they used to mean when the terms first came into usage, yeah.
Well, I would say that they've changed over the centuries, but when you and I were kids, conservatism had a pretty specific meaning. John Dean has written about it.
Mm-hmm.
John Dean was Nixon's chief counsel.
Yes.
You'll recall. And
fine man.
You're right, and he was the one that counseled Nixon to resign, basically, or tell the truth and leave it up to the Congress whether or not he stays in office. Anyway, he went from being a staunch Republican to being an independent. And he said, I didn't leave the party left me. Well, you can say the same thing about the Democratic Party now.
Uh-huh.
So neither party represents us, they represent the corporate interest.
Yes.
People like to point out, of course, there's a difference between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats are, they're pro individual liberties, like they're pro-choice. And they don't think the government should, be involved in the bedroom. So the Republicans say that they're for individual liberties, but it's only if it's the liberties that they think are good.
And then
the liberty to make money, the liberty to control other people.
What do these two parties do? What has been their performance in recent years, particularly where you can see a real significant difference when it comes to how the U.S. is behaving on the world scene as far as justice and human responsibility? There's not a major difference between them. There's two corporate parties.
It's domestic social issues is where they differ. Yes, there's a difference. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the big issues, what's destroying the American economy, what's destroying American society, and what's destroying the soul, what I call the soul of America, morality, that's, both parties are guilty.
Yeah. Memberships in the political, social, or civic organizations, do you hold any memberships in any organizations like that are worth mentioning?
Well, it's probably worth mentioning after what I just said that I am a PCC, a precinct committee person in the local Democratic Central Committee.
Precinct committee person in local, okay.
We don't have we don't have any third-party central committees in Coos Bay, and I'm trying to be a positive influence. But I got to tell you that these people are so deluded into believing that Democrats are so much better than Republicans that they cannot be criticized, that they won't criticize them, and they don't like it when you do. So when I quit the party to run for the Progressive Party for the U.S. Senate, that didn't make me a lot of friends, especially in the executive committee. And the president of the executive committee, the one that's going out now, actually argued that I shouldn't be allowed back as a precinct committee person because I wasn't a real Democrat. And
never mind democracy.
all right, and I got to tell you, the incoming president has a radio show, and I kind of like to listen to it because he knows a lot about state and local politics, and I don't know much about him. Mm-hmm. But when he talks about national politics, he says crazy things like, "We are living in the most peaceful time in history."
Okay.
This is how deluded Democratic partisans are.
All right. Maybe one more question before we take a break and we get to the meat of the show.
Sure.
What's important nowadays. Any persons alive today or from the past that you particularly look up to or looked up to or admired? Any names come to mind?
Well, yeah. I've studied the presidents, so they're the first ones that come to mind. But
sure.
Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, George Washington, they all had their faults, but I think that if we had more presidents like that, it wouldn't have gotten this bad.
So the presidents we've had since their time, they've not been primarily for social justice and human responsibility?
Not primarily. I think Carter was, and I think Johnson was at times, and I think that Kennedy was. But we don't really know what Kennedy would have done. Like I said, they're not perfect. We all remember Vietnam. But you know, the evidence, I believe, shows that Kennedy was ready to pull out of Vietnam. That's what a lot of people close to him said. Johnson, on the other hand, sold his soul, such as it was.
They're going to yell at me if I don't take a break.
Oh, go ahead.
Let's take a break for a few minutes and catch our breath, all right?
Sure.
Okay, Mr. Director. Got a couple minutes. Yeah. Okay, we are back. Thank you for staying tuned. And we're going to talk about this show and what it's about for a moment for you people who just stumbled across the show and didn't get the opening. Conversations with Dr. Don that you're watching is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is that we've decided to talk about. And my guest this evening, Dr. Rick Staggenborg, and there's so much to talk about with him, we need 3 hours because he goes on, and I learn every time you come on. That's why I have you on repeatedly, because I keep learning, and you're so good at what you're talking about. So let's continue now to the meat of the show. What's important on December 20, 2012? when this show was being recorded. And we have a list of possible things to talk about now. I'll tick those off, and then I'll let you take over and decide where we go first.
Sure.
Austerity in America, the fiscal cliff. You talked about unifying a movement. That's an overarching thing. The drones, surveillance drones and attack drones in Syria and Iran, Israel and Gaza, Egypt, climate change. Where do we go from here, Dr. Rick?
Well, the fact that we have so many things assaulting our senses every day is the reason that we need to have a unified movement. People they can't focus on all these issues at once. What unifies all these issues is corruption in government. None of these things would happen if we were a true democracy and our government acted in our interests. But because the interests of the U.S. have been defined by our government, at least since World War II, as what's good for international corporations, there's no congruence between their interests and our interests. And yet that's what decisions in Washington are made based on, especially decisions about war and peace, but also about how you set up the tax structure. Are you going to benefit corporations over individuals? And by individuals, I mean working people, not CEOs and investors. Who gets the benefit? David Kane Johnston wrote a couple of great books talking about how the tax system is set up to make the wealthy wealthier. And corporations have been given constitutional rights so that they're created as a privilege by the state, and the state should be regulating them, but they're not. And they're not even holding CEOs responsible for capital crimes, like the CEO of BP, who the corporation was convicted of killing 11 people. No human being went to prison for that. There were people that were fined, found guilty criminally, but they were lower down on the ladder.
So the corporations are more important than individual governments or nations' governing documents and constitutions. Those are by the wayside when the corporations' interests are being addressed?
By and large, Paddy Chayefsky in Network back in, 1980-something, he said, "Mr. Beale, there are no nations. There is only the almighty dollar." That's the long and the short of it. You are absolutely right. Transnational corporations are now superseding governments. And the perfect example is the World Trade Organization, which has the ability to, people can take countries. That is to say, one country can take a country to a court that's totally unaccountable to any government, as private lawyers representing corporations, suing a country on behalf of another country because a corporation supposedly got hurt, which is supposed to hurt that country. Well, they've decided to dispense with the middleman. Now they've got the Trans-Pacific Partnership or Free Trade Agreement.
Which is NAFTA on steroids.
It's NAFTA on steroids. It's an agreement between, I think there's about 15 countries negotiating right now, but it's designed so they can just add other countries on if they sign on.
But you're adding countries, but are these countries are just names? Because there's really the multinational corporations or the big super corporations that actually have the power and will decide what's going to go on.
That's exactly the point I was going to make. There's 600 representatives of business who are negotiating this in secret. And Senator Wyden asked for the reports that are coming out of this, the decisions and positions that are being made, and he was denied. So our senators, our senator who's on the subcommittee for trade was not allowed to see these documents.
Our Oregon senator, Senator Wyden, yeah.
The guy I ran against. Nobody's all bad, I said that earlier. Yeah. He's doing a really good job fighting this and fighting government secrecy and protecting the internet. So, maybe I would have done the same thing if I'd been elected, but still I admire him for that. But we're getting out the point.
Sure.
The point I was getting at was exactly what you said, and that is that the Trans-Pacific Partnership goes beyond the agreement with the World Trade Organization where one country can sue another or a corporation can get a country to sue another. Now the corporation doesn't have to go to the government of their country or one of the countries they operate in. They can sue directly. So you talk about corporations being superseding governments. I don't know what other evidence you need. I mean, it slaps you in the face. And I don't hear enough people talking about that aspect of the Trans-Pacific Free Trade Agreement. We know about the problems with free trade agreements in general. They ship jobs overseas. Workers don't have rights because that's an unfair trade advantage for countries that, or a trade restriction, I should say. And same with environmental issues. So everybody knows about that, but what they don't seem to focus on is the fact that a corporation can sue a country now.
Let's jump to something else for a moment.
Sure.
Yeah. Someone was talking about a wealth tax instead of an income tax on Americans. How do you feel about taxing the wealth of an individual rather than just his or her income?
Well, in general, I like it, although this is the first I've heard of it. If I understand the concept correctly, I like it. But to do something like that is a political process. You're not going to go there directly.
Mm-hmm.
But I said earlier, all these issues are related to corruption of the government by corporations and the rich. I frequently say by corporations because most people who are rich got rich through corporations.
What do you do about that, this corruption of government by corporations? What do we need to do about that?
We need to elect a Congress that will pass a constitutional amendment that will abolish corporate personhood and declare that money is not speech.
How do we do that?
Well, we get candidates to run on that issue, to hammer that issue, and we get people to pay attention until we take out a few corporate Democrats and corporate Republicans and replace them with people who will support this. See, this is an issue that cuts across ideological boundaries. 80% of self-identified conservatives and liberals, roughly, were opposed to Citizens United. But you know, America's got this attention deficit disorder. If it wasn't in the last 24-hour news cycle, they forget, so we need to remind them and make this a campaign issue.
Why do Americans have this attention deficit disorder when it comes to deciding who to vote for, who to represent them?
Well, part of it is because the majority of American voters, anyway, believe that one party or the other represents them. And speaking, of course, of the duopoly.
Why is that? Why do American voters believe that?
Why?
The evidence is clear that those two parties don't represent the average American. Why is that?
Well, I think it's the same reason that I like the St. Louis Cardinals, because my dad grew up in St. Louis, and my dad's a Cards fan, so am I. And politics to most people is like a football game. You pick a side, and then you root for the side that you picked, and you don't care if they're criminals. Remember the Jailblazers? They still sold out the Coliseum every single game for years after they started calling them the Jailblazers, because people don't care if they're criminals.
What I'm trying to get you to talk about is money and political process. Yeah, because money, the super rich, rule and own everything. And we're not going to have representatives in our government speaking for ordinary citizens as long as money decides who's going to be elected. And the media is complicit.
Well, people don't think about where that money goes, or most people don't. Some people do. That money goes directly to the networks. That's where the bulk of that money goes.
And who owns the networks?
Corporations. And they're also, it's to their benefit to make these things horse races. But the media plays a huge role in picking the candidates. Now, the media didn't give a damn that I ran for the Senate. Hardly anybody in the media wanted to know what I thought. I went and did an interview with Willamette Week. It was clear from the beginning they were going to endorse Wyden. The Oregonian endorsed Wyden, and Register Guard endorsed Wyden. And you know why? What their reasoning was? Because he's a powerful senator, because he's been in there so long. And then how many people on the street say, get rid of all the bums? And yet the main argument for keeping it was because it'd been in there longer. What a bunch of BS.
So Willamette Week is a local Portland independent publication, right? And the Oregonian independent.
The Register Guard really is independent, I think, and I think that they meant it when they said that, but that's the mindset. You know, you got most people saying, well, nobody can win but Democrat or Republican, so we have to pick a side and root for them. And then the parties themselves, they won't put up a challenger if you have a corporate Democrat like Wyden. So the only other option is for people to give up that self-fulfilling prophecy. If most people believe you can't elect a third-party candidate, then you can't, because they won't vote for him. They want a winner.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's much like 99% of people in the world think that war is inevitable. Is it, Don? Of course not. It's a result of choices. If we, the people, stood up and said, no, we are not going to do this anymore, and that was my idea when I started Soldiers for Peace International, if enough of us stood up and said, no, we are not going to put up with it, and we're going to throw the bums out who are behind this.
How are you going to educate the people to throw the bums out?
Well, like I said, you can't educate them on every issue, but people who are working in the anti-war community should be tying this to government corruption by corporations. You could tie every one of these issues to that. What's going on in the Mideast, Iraq, Afghanistan, the austerity, the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. What other issues? The fiscal cliff, drones, all these, climate change, that's the one I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So we have all these people working on all these issues, and we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of organizations competing for funds and media attention and the attention of the public any way they can get it. What about this? What if instead of competing they cooperated? Now we're seeing some cooperation. We're seeing groups now working together more, I think, than they used to. But it's nothing like it was back during the Vietnam War, when every cause, people went out in the demonstrations, and they brought their women's liberation signs and their end racism signs and their end war signs to the same demonstrations.
Why doesn't that happen today? Why isn't that going on today? What you're talking about that needs to happen. Why isn't it going on today?
Again, I think is people are they're just so blown away by all these causes, and every single one is so hard to fight. Especially, well, the reason they're so hard to fight, the main reason, is because you're taking on entrenched powers, and most people say, our government doesn't represent us. What good does it do to petition them? What good does it do to protest? And they're right to an extent. And that's why I'm encouraging environmentalists, people who want healthcare reform, peace activists, to tie all this to corporate corruption and government, because the only way we're going to deal with it is to take the bums out by making them tell us whether or not they'll support a constitutional amendment.
They need to be educated.
Right.
And as long as we have a corporate media that has such power, the ordinary citizenry will not be educated. The media needs to be recognized as having as much power as other branches of government.
That's right, and that's
controlled and regulated.
That's why I object to this program here, because it's part of the media. No, you have to distinguish between the corporate media and the alternative media.
Okay.
And then
that's what I get to.
But don't mistake what people call the alternative media for the real alternative media, because I call most of the people in the alternative media, progressive radio stations, they're nothing but an echo chamber of the right. They talk about what the right's talking about, and then they make fun of it, and they stick up for the Democrats, and they don't point out their flaws. That's 99% of what you hear on progressive.
I will disagree with you. Probably maybe 80-90%.
I stand corrected.
Not 99%.
I stand corrected.
There are a few out there who are really looking objectively at what's going on and why we're in the situation, the condition we're in right now.
Well, some of them knew it, and I'll give you an example that's really hits home. Mike Malloy I can't speak for him, but I think from what he says, he would consider himself a socialist. And yet, more and more, he's defending the Democrats because the Republicans are so bad. I see that as falling into the same trap. You know,
How about Chris Hedges?
Chris Hedges is really good. I mean, he is.
There are a few like him out there.
Yeah, there are, but, and fortunately, people pay a lot of attention to what Chris Hedges says. David Swanson's another one. I mean, but one of the problems is that some of these people.
Noam Chomsky.
Howard Zinn when he was alive.
Yeah.
But one of the problems is that a lot of these people in these groups have given up on the political process.
Sure.
And they all want
why.
people to get behind them, and they're going to start a grassroots movement, and it's going to somehow force the government to change. No, you cannot ignore the political process. What we should be focusing on is transforming that process and creating a real democracy. You can have all the fantasies you want about not needing government at all if people take care of each other and all that. I love the idea, but you're not going to get there from here directly.
And I hear you going back to unify a movement over and over again by different directions, and I'm not getting what I need to hear from you.
What's that?
How do you unify a movement?
Okay.
So you're talking about different aspects of it, and we're ending up with so.
I've run through it, but not in let me just give it the shortest version possible. You unify a movement by picking an issue that everybody can relate to. And I mean, not just people in the movement, but people outside the movement. They can relate to it. How many people support Congress? It's frequently in the single digits, and it's never much over that.
Sure.
So everybody understands government doesn't work. What percentage of people do you think understand that government is corrupt? That the system is corrupted? I'm not talking about everybody.
A huge percentage.
A huge percentage. So, and it's that corruption that prevents Congress from addressing any of these critical issues. Global climate change, fair taxation, ending the wars, bringing that money home, providing universal health care.
How do you change the Congress?
I will repeat it. Shorthand, pledge to amend. And what that is people have to identify people who are willing to support a constitutional amendment, as I did in 2010, and support them, work for them, beat on doors for them during their campaigns, get the word out that there are people willing to change the Constitution to do something that 80% of Americans agree needs to be done.
So that is an issue that is of prime importance to have some effect on the way our country is heading and the way our government is behaving.
Absolutely, and
All right.
And I'm encouraging. I want Bill McKibben to start talking about that. I want, because then everybody in the climate change movement will pay attention. I want David Swanson to talk about that, and all the other great leaders in the anti-war movement. I want Veterans for Peace to talk about that. Leah Bolger. All the anti-war people should be talking about this. We knew this in Vietnam, that it was corporate profit that drove that war.
Time is running out. I got to ask you about a couple of, and I'm encouraging this, a couple of things that we need to be more specific about. Austerity in America. Is austerity coming to America, or is it here already?
Well, let me put it this way. If it wasn't for Social Security and Medicare, we probably already would have had a revolution, because it's masking the fact that the real unemployment rate is probably closer to 25%, depression level. Certainly, it was at least as high as 17% in 2009. And if all those people had nothing to eat and no housing, do you really think that they wouldn't revolt? That might be what it takes. So if these austerity measures go through and ordinary people get hurt even worse than they are, millions of people losing their homes.
Someone suggests that
tens of millions of people without health care. Why are these people not in the street?
Some people are suggesting that the fiscal cliff is just a fantasy. It's a mechanism to get us conditioned so that we can accept austerity in America without revolting and taking over the country.
Right, because most people don't pay attention to what's going on in Europe. All they know is, there's something about this Euro thing. But it's they've already done it in Europe. And like I said, there were mass protests. It isn't very well covered in the corporate media, and is one reason people don't know. But when they do see a picture of thousands of people rioting in Athens, why don't they ask themselves why they're rioting? I don't think most people do.
I understand that you really like the idea of drones being used by America all over the world. Give a shake. Talk about drones. What's your feeling about drones? And there's two kinds, aren't there?
Well, there's surveillance drones, and then there's offensive drones, weaponized drones.
What do you think of surveillance drones?
I don't like them. I think that they have some potential uses that are legitimate, spotting forest fires, for instance, locating people who become lost on Mount Hood or whatever, although they usually carry locators, but not always. I mean, there's some legitimate uses, but information obtained through drone surveillance, like if they're looking in your backyard and they see pot plants, that should not be admissible. You have a reasonable expectation of privacy right now in your backyard, but with drones, the courts will, certainly this Supreme Court, would say that you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy. They don't believe you have a reasonable expectation of privacy in your goddamn rectum if you get picked up for jaywalking. They say the police can strip search you for anything, just suspicion.
Mm-hmm. How about attack drones?
Attack
like
drones?
Stop laughing at me, Rick. I got to get to a couple of these things before they tell us to shut up.
No, attack drones are completely immoral. I mean, killing at a distance. Did you know that and people in the military are beginning to realize that too. Did you know that the rate of PTSD in drone operators is higher than the general population in the military?
That's good data. I've heard that, but yeah, I trust your reporting of that. Yeah.
So if they see this as immoral, and that is the main reason that they have, I mean, what else could it be? They're killing at a distance. You really think they're going to get PTSD just from imagining that, or maybe seeing a puff of smoke on a screen?
Yeah.
No, they've got PTSD because they know what they're doing is immoral, and it causes a tremendous moral conflict. In fact, that's probably the main reason people get PTSD in general. Killing somebody is not easy to do, and a lot of people, that's enough to cause PTSD. It's what Dr. Edward Tick calls a soul wound.
A soul wound. Yes, I've not heard that term before. And we're running out of time, but a couple more briefly here. Syria. Give me an answer for Syria. Nobody has an answer for Syria.
You mean how's it going to play out?
Yes, yes.
Well, if Americans were awake and Europeans, and we stood up for Syria, we could end it. It's such an obvious setup. If we let them know that we know what they're doing, they would stop doing it. They still have plausible deniability, our government, for what they've done. They've admitted that they're shipping arms that end up in the hands of terrorists. They're pretending it's not, and they know the difference. That's why they put one of the terrorist mercenaries groups in Syria on the terrorist list. They want to make it look like they know the good guys and the bad guys.
So is our
They're all terrorists.
Is our government playing a game of let's you and him fight, so that the Syrians can fight among themselves, and that way they won't present a unified resistance to American domination?
Absolutely, and it isn't working. It's not changing the hearts and minds of the people in Syria. From what I hear from reporters that know the facts on the ground, the Syrian people are more behind Assad than they were before. Because they see the consequences of working with NATO. It's destroying their civil society. They have different religious, they have ethnic conflict, murders like they didn't have before. Sound a little bit like Iraq?
30 seconds. Israel, Gaza. What's going to happen there?
It's impossible for me to say. It depends on whether Western governments and their peoples, more importantly, stand for Palestine. If we removed U.S. support for Israel, financial support, the Israeli government would be forced to change.
Okay, it's close to time for us to stop, so let's see if we can wind down and talk about a few public service announcements so that you can know what you should know and be aware of. And what else was I going to say? To get my show local broadcast schedule, go to my website, www.donbaham.com, and click on present day activities to watch my shows on the web. Go to my website again and click on favorite links. There's a whole bunch of my shows on there. And the American Civil Liberties Union, we desperately need the ACLU because our civil liberties are really in trouble anymore with this administration nowadays. And next we will talk about other stations around the country to broadcast my shows on their local public access station. Go to www.pegmedia.org and follow the instructions on the screen there. And ending corporate personhood. Are you ready for that, Rick?
I'm ready.
Go to www.movetoamend.org. That is so critically important. Movetoamend.org and figure out enjoying the push to end corporate personhood because corporations are running our country. We got to stop that. All right. So what else we got to say? Oh, thanks for watching. Remember KFC, not Kentucky Fried Chicken. Dr. Don's KFC, kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable to you too. And you too, Rick. And you too, control room. And you too, nurse. And you too. Thanks again for watching. Have a good holiday.